We'll wait just another minute or so. It's funny because, you know, if we were in the gallery, remember in the old days when you could actually go to a gallery and see stuff? Remember that? We could actually be in the same room together and all that kind of thing. And then everybody would be eating cheese and drinking wine and stuff. And there would be something to do as you're waiting for everybody to gather. But now it's just, you know, what do you do, right? Just kind of look at each other in little boxes. It's an odd world we live in. More people. And the other thing is everybody gets muted. And so we can't ever hear anybody laugh anymore in the beginning, you know? So if you feel like you want to laugh, you got to smile or something so we know you're laughing. Okay, wait one more minute, and then we're going to jump right in. Okay. So I want to welcome you all here tonight. It's really, really lovely to see you. And you know, the funny thing is, if we were going to be in the gallery tonight, we would have had to cancel. So that's a good thing, right? We didn't have to cancel. We're all together on this snowy night. I want to welcome you to the opening of Uncaged Art, Tornillo Children's Detention Camp. It's an exhibit that originated at the University of Texas, El Paso Centennial Museum. And it's a collection of the work of young people ages 13 through 17 who were detained in the Tornillo Detention Center in West Texas. It's comprised of paintings and drawings and handicrafts made of found materials. The work reflects the resiliency and the talent and creativity of the young men and women who trekked 2,000 miles from their home in Central America to reach the United States. This evening is very important to me personally because about a year and a half ago, I was listening to NPR on a Saturday morning, and I heard Scott Pelley talk about this exhibit. And really, since then, we've been trying to arrange to bring it to Charter Oak, originally, obviously, physically. And then once the pandemic hit, and it became clear that it might be even easier to bring the exhibit here because there's no physical, you know, shipping of art. We wanted to take advantage of that. So it's been a long time coming. And I want to just say that ever since the immigration policies of the Trump administration, there has not been a day when I have awakened in the morning without my heart hurting for this. I mean, it's almost too painful. And I'm sure that a lot of you shared this with me. It is almost too painful to think of what these children went through and how they were separated from their parents and how many of them still are separated. And I can't even imagine the kind of lack of heart that would lead to that kind of cruelty. And we wanted to do this exhibit now, even though the Trump administration is now over, because so many of the children have not been returned to their parents, because the trauma is lifetime trauma, that even those who have been reunited with their parents, this is trauma that will affect them always. And we did it. It was done in our name. And this is, to me, one of the travesties of American history. And as somebody who's Jewish and bears a trauma of the Holocaust, not personally in my own experience, but the kind of generational trauma, as many of you probably share, this is just unacceptable to me. And so tonight, we are going to look at this art, and it's not just art, It's about the tenacity of the human spirit. It's about the cruelty, and it's also about the tenacity of the human spirit that these children exhibited. And it's also about the power of the arts to heal, which is something that obviously at Charter Oak Cultural Center we take very seriously. So I want to tell you a couple of things about what's coming up at Charter Oak, and then I'm going to introduce our wonderful, wonderful, wonderful speaker for the night. So you know that Charter Oak is a multicultural arts center, and it's committed to doing the work of social justice through the arts. In addition to our Youth Arts Institute, which provides 1,000 Hartford children with a free, sophisticated arts education. And our Youth Arts Director, Susan Mazer, is here tonight, and she's amazing. And we also offer 3 programs to people in the homeless community that provide educational and employment opportunities. And we have a full schedule of arts events that bring people together to learn from and about each other, and from which no one is ever turned away for lack of funds. And since the pandemic, we have expanded our programming because we wanted to be a source of comfort and joy for the community, and anchor in the midst of some very rough seas. So coming up on Thursday, so tonight we're together, and then coming up on Thursday is a lecture by UConn professor Chris Viles called Stand Up and Stand By, What Donald Trump Has Taught Us About Authoritarianism and the United States. Next Thursday night, we'll resume our discussion of the book, My Grandmother's Hands, which is about racialized trauma and police violence and how to bring an end to that. And even if you have not joined us before, you are welcome to jump in at any time. And if you're not on our mailing list, you can sign up and see all the wonderful things we're offering, because we're doing things every week. And we'd love you to become part of the Charter Oak family if you're not already a member. We are so blessed tonight to have with us the curator of the exhibit, Dr. Yolanda Leyva. Dr. Leyva is a frontier, and you have to forgive my terrible pronunciation of all these words in Spanish, and I really do apologize. Dr. Leyva is a fronteriza, born and raised on the U.S.-Mexico border. She has dedicated her career to documenting the stories of people on the border. She teaches border and Mexican-American history as an associate professor at the University of Texas, El Paso, and directs the Institute of Oral History. Her most recent oral history project is Seeking Refuge, a collection of interviews with asylum seekers and their advocates, in which she is assisted by her doctoral research assistants, Kimberly Sumano Ortega and Ligia Arguelles. She is also a founding member of Paso del Sur, a grassroots organization that works with barrios facing demolition and displacement. Please join me in giving the warmest, warmest welcome to our honored guest, Dr. Yolanda Leyva.
I'm really, really happy to be here with all of you, and very grateful to the Charter Oak Cultural Center for the invitation to speak with you tonight. Of course, my dogs start barking as soon as I start talking. Sorry. I'm really anxious to see what you think about the art after you have the opportunity to look at it. I think we're going to start out by showing you the art first, and then I'll make some comments on the art. I want to acknowledge Denise Amparan, who is here today too, who works for the Institute. We would not have the ability to work so easily with people across the country getting this art exhibit out. So thank you, Denise, and thank you for being here. And I look forward to talking with all of you shortly.
So I'm just going to jump in for a second. So what we're going to do is we're going to just take a few moments to look at the art in silence, let it speak to you, and feel whatever is going on inside of you as you look at it. And then Dr. Leyva will go through all of the pieces with us.
For my vision, I look at the president. Got it, babe?
Mm-hmm.
We've been living with this art for 2 years. This month is 2 years since we first got the art from the Tornillo camp. And still, every time that I look at it at a presentation, it fills me with so much sadness. So she has some of the art in her office that sometimes we're just walking around trying not to, well, me, trying not to run into it and hurt it. But to see it in a presentation always reminds me of what those children went through. What I'd like to do before we go piece by piece is tell you a little bit about what happened with those children. In 2019, in the summer, the federal government gave a contract to an organization called the Baptist Family and Children's Services, who run refugee centers all over the globe. They gave them a contract to open what the government called an emergency influx center for mostly Central American children who either cross the border by themselves, and we do have older teenagers who do that, or children who are separated from their families through Trump's zero tolerance policy. The zero tolerance policy took children away from parents that were crossing the border to ask for asylum. And under our asylum laws, they don't have to cross at a port of entry. They can cross anywhere and ask for asylum. But under this zero tolerance policy, if they crossed someplace other than a port of entry, their children would be taken from them. And as we know, still today, there's about 600 children under the care of the federal government because not only were they separated from their parents, but their parents were immediately deported and can't be found now. So there's 600 children just in limbo, wondering what's going to happen to them. So in June of 2019, this emergency influx center was opened. There are elected officials who called it a child prison. It started out small, capable of housing 400 children. By the time that it closed, just a few months later in January of 2019, there were about 2,600 children. So about 6,000 children went through this camp in the months that it was open. Let me tell you about this camp. It's about 30 miles from El Paso, where we live, in a rural area, in a desert area, and it was built literally facing the border wall. So on one side was the border wall, the other, and the children were taken there to this place that was comprised of huge white tents. It was built from nothing. Huge white tents that held 40 boys each. The girls' tents held 20 girls. It was probably 85% boys. And everything had to be brought in. Water had to be brought in daily. Sewage had to be taken out daily. It cost, by the time it was coming to its end, it cost $1 million a day to run this camp. So it's something that cost taxpayers millions of dollars. The camp was very secretive, very, very secretive and very militarized. When we go back through the art, you'll see some of the art labeled. So each tent was named according to the military alphabet, Alpha, Beta, Charlie, Delta. The children were never alone, ever. They were always under surveillance by guards, by staff people. Even when they went to the bathroom, they couldn't go to the bathroom by themselves. When they left their tents, they had to walk in very straight rows from tent to tent. I was able to volunteer at some of the shelters on this side of the border while people were being released, and children's parents would say, who were reunited with their children, fortunately, would say, oh, the guards told them if they were not in a perfectly straight line, that they would stay there forever. And these, 6,000 kids, they didn't know first where they were. They were in a landscape very different from the beautiful landscape that you see in the art, with green, with water, because we're the Chihuahuan Desert. They didn't know when they would be released, if they would be released. They didn't know when they would see their family again. They were allowed 30 minutes of phone calls per week, and they usually spent 15 minutes talking to their families, and they're mostly from Central America, so in Central America, and 15 minutes talking to their sponsors here. And you may know that when you request asylum from the United States, in order to be released, you need to have a sponsor in the United States who will take financial responsibility for you and who promises to ensure that you go to your court dates. So these children all had sponsors. So there was not a true reason for them to be in this camp other than the Trump administration using cruelty and increasing cruelty to deter other people from coming to the border. The staff who worked there had to sign non-disclosure agreements. So they were not allowed to say anything about how the camp ran, what it was like. The children were not allowed visitors. The children were not allowed Christmas gifts that were donated at Christmas time. Finally, through our state senator, he arranged for them to get soccer balls as gifts. So people donated soccer balls to him, and then his staff was able to deliver it, but that was the only thing. People tried to write letters to the kids just to say we're here. That wasn't allowed. There was a very dedicated Joshua Rubin is a computer program developer from New York City. And he said that he was in New York City and he thought to himself, I need to do something. I can't just be here at home while these children are locked up in this children's prison. So he came to El Paso, he rented an RV, he asked permission to camp on county property, and he was there from October to January. And every day he stood outside, of course they didn't let him in, he stood outside the gates with a sign that said, free them, or you are not alone. So when the buses would come down the road bringing the children, they could see him. One day he walked around the back of the camp where the kids had a soccer field, and he was talking to the kids through the topped with barbed wire. So it was really like a prison. So he talked to the kids and the guards came over and they threatened kids, don't talk to that man. The next day, the fence all around the camp was covered in black tarp, so the kids couldn't see out and no one could see in. They put huge, huge mounds of dirt in front of the tents so that you couldn't see the kids from the road. So it's like these kids were hidden. Their voices were not heard. In November of 2019, a group of attorneys and a psychologist were thankfully allowed into the camp. And the reason that they went to the camp was to make sure that the children were being treated properly. And there's a federal court ruling going back to the 1990s called the Flores Agreement. that laid out what the government has to provide for children in detention. So they wanted to make sure that that was being provided. I worked with one of the attorneys, Camilo Perez Bustillo, and what he told me he saw going into that camp were children who were traumatized, isolated, depressed, and very desperate. Father Garcia, who was able to give us the artwork, because he gave mass, there were both, well, you saw a lot of Catholic images in the artwork, but there were also many Protestant children. So Father Garcia was giving mass, and I asked him, what was it like in there, Father? And he said it was like a combination of Disneyland and a concentration camp. Like the superficial stuff, the kids had lots of snacks. Oh, that's it. They had lots of snacks. The food was apparently pretty good, but they couldn't leave. They had absolutely no freedom. And imagine being locked up in this very isolated camp and you don't know when you're going to get out. While I understand this next policy I'm going to tell you about, this policy also created a lot of suffering with the kids. The kids were not allowed to have any physical contact with each other. And I understand that, protecting the kids. But what that meant was that brothers and sisters couldn't hug. It meant that when a child was released, and they incarcerated altogether. So if a child was released and they were very close, they couldn't hug goodbye. So the children talk about how sad that was, not to be able to hug their friends goodbye. So it's in this context that this art is produced. In December of 2019, the Tornillo Center hired 2 social studies teachers. And the 2 social studies teachers said, let's do an art project. They had no training in art, but they thought, let's do something to cheer up the kids. So they gave the kids the most inexpensive of materials. They gave them recycled boxes, construction paper, pipe cleaners, popsicle sticks, glue. And what they asked the kids to do was to remember their evenly divided among Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador. And the kids from Guatemala were for the most part indigenous kids who spoke a Mayan language. So remember what it was like back home. What are you proud of? What is your culture like? And the project lasted 4 days. The kids worked in teams as well as individually. Over the course of 4 days, the kids produced 400 pieces of art. 400 pieces to me is amazing in 4 days. What happened with that art is that the staff chose the art they thought was the best, and that's what you see in these photos, and they threw away the rest. They threw away 370 pieces of art. Closed in January of 2019. And I was driving out there. I had accompanied Joshua Rubin with my family holding our signs so the kids could see us. So I went out there as it was closing and they were throwing everything away. Within 2 weeks, you could never tell that camp had existed. There was not a trace of it. And when that camp closed, and I believe that it closed because Baptist Child and Family Services had as one of their values that they are doing the work of God on behalf of God for children. but they came under such public pressure. Horrible situation for the children that they didn't renew their contract because they felt, this is what I think, that they felt a moral obligation to close. The government immediately gave another contract, but this time to a corporation that was headed by former military, high-ranking people that were all connected to Trump. And they opened it in Florida. And that corporation, like, you couldn't make them feel bad. You couldn't point out the immorality because it didn't matter to them. So when this camp closed in January of 2019, out of those 2,600 children that were at that camp, 2,300, they were just there. They were just there to deter other people from coming by our governmental policy. There is absolutely no reason for them to be there other than that. 300 children did not have sponsors, so we don't know where they were sent, but they had to have been sent. I bet they were sent to the camp in Florida. That's what I think. As the camp was closing and Father Garcia was giving mass, he saw the art, the 30 pieces. And of course, he was very drawn to it because it's so beautiful, as you saw. And he said, well, what's going to happen to this art? And I don't know what they told him, but he asked, if I find someone that can protect it and share it with the world, will you give it to them? And they said yes. So he called me immediately and said, will you take it? And I had no clue what he meant. I didn't expect such beauty, and I didn't expect the variety of forms of art. So 2 days later, my office was filled with this incredible art. And we said, we have to immediately display it. We have to tell this story immediately. So we began to exhibit Uncaged Art in April. My co-curator and my friend, Dr. David Romo, came up with the title, Uncaged Art, because the kids in the camp told the teachers that the quetzal bird that you're going to see throughout, that the quetzal bird, which is the national bird of Guatemala, it can't be caged because if it's caged, it dies. And I thought, is that true? I Googled it. So it turns out all these scientists say it's true. You can't domesticate it. They do die. So we thought, well, that represents the children, right? If you cage up the children, that's going to kill part of them. It's like Donna said about this, passing on of trauma. So we called it Uncaged Art because we thought we're going to free their art and work towards freeing them. So I'd love to go through the artwork with you now and just say a few words about the artwork. I'm really, really grateful that we have photos of it and they're professional photos. The one thing you can't tell from the photos is the size of things. And I really wish you could see the size of things, but I'll talk about that. So this is a wonderful graphic that just won an award. Amy Briones, who works for the Centennial, designed that for us, and she did a really great job with that. I don't know what you call it, logo, not sure. This is one of my favorite pieces. It's made of boxes. You can see the little benches are made of popsicle sticks, so maybe that gives you an idea of the size. The rosary that you see hanging on that cross was a rosary that belonged to one of the kids. I think the priest must have given rosary to be part of this. I don't know if you can kind of see that there's little stones on the green construction paper that represents the front of the church. The kids were able to pick up little stones outside and incorporate them into the work. I don't know if it's the next one, but we're gonna see a photo of the inside of the church. So parrots and quetzal birds are everywhere in the art. This parrot is the national, well, there it says, Ave Nacional de Honduras, the national bird of Honduras. So we have a lot of birds. You know, as we were looking at what the children drew and we saw so many birds, we thought back to the artwork that survived from Terezin, the concentration camp in Poland, where there still are thousands of pieces of children's art, and how they drew birds and they drew butterflies. And I think we can imagine what that means to children who are behind barbed wire to do birds and butterflies. There's a beautiful book of artwork from that camp called I Never Saw Another Butterfly, if you ever want to look at that. So lots of greenery too in all the pictures. I love this one so much. It's totally made of construction paper. And sometimes when I look at it, I think it's real food. So these are the tamales, pupusas, but it's so realistic. And I thought whoever that was very creative. Now, we don't know, with a couple of exceptions, we don't know the names of the children who created this art. One reason that we don't know the names is because the art could not be released publicly with their names because they're minors, so that's to protect them. It turned out that we actually could see the names on the back of some of the art, so we consulted Camilo, the attorney I told you about a second ago, and he said, even if we can actually figure out the names, he said, we don't want to show those names because these children have court dates coming up to be granted asylum. And if they're part of an exhibit that in any way is critical of the, so we made sure not to show names, so we don't know. This is one where I wish that you could see the size. So it's the national symbols of Guatemala. If you can see, there's a little dress towards the right. That little dress was knitted without any, let me see if I can say that, without any knitting needles. They just used their hands to knit it, and it's probably 4 inches big. It's the tiniest little piece of work. This is the very front of that blue church that I was talking about. So it says, welcome to the Divina Misericordia. And instead of chapel, it says chapper. So they were being bilingual there. So the image of, well, you can see the Virgen de Guadalupe. I think that's everywhere because it was in December, which is her month. So I think they just had access to those images. But image of divine mercy. I don't know if anyone here is Catholic, but it's an image of Jesus, and there are like two streams of light coming out of his hands, and one is blue and one is red, and one represents his blood, and one represents water that came out of his body when he was what is the word? Like stabbed. Very, very beloved image in Central America. And I thought, here they are recreating this chapel to the Divine Mercy when they're asking for mercy. You know, when they go before the judge, that's what they're doing. They're asking for mercy. They're escaping incredible poverty. They're escaping violence, which in the case of Honduras is violence created by the government and the opponents to the government, and they're escaping gang violence. So they're asking for mercy. This is a city in Guatemala. Oh, there's the little tiny dresses I was telling you about. But look at that delicate little work. And there's the quetzal bird twice, because remember, this is a piece of artwork representing the national symbols of Guatemala. And there's the inside of the blue church. You know, when I looked at that little podium, when I looked at those tiny little benches everything made of popsicle sticks, they are so tiny. And I just think about care that the kids took in making this art. It's all very delicate. And, you know, construction paper and boxes. So this indigenous man appears in a couple of places. He represents one of the national heroes of Guatemala who fought the Spanish during the conquest. And there's the quetzal flying above him. None of these kids, with the exception of one, had any art classes ever. I'm glad we have a photo more. It was made of the kind of sand that you use in arts and crafts. But over time it got flatter and flatter and flatter, and there was no way to preserve it that anyone could figure out. So this is, pyramids are another image that you'll see. Even in this photo, it's already flattened a lot. It was very tall when it was first created. Next to the blue church, I would say this is my other favorite piece that I love. So this is probably maybe 2 feet by almost 2 feet. It's a large piece. And you can see right there, it's made by the kids in the tent soccer field. The kids in Tornillo were allowed to play soccer once a day. And they did have a soccer field using AstroTurf. And it's the only time that they were allowed to jump, to run, to scream, just to be, you know, kids with a lot of energy. And when I saw this recreation of a soccer field from back home, it made me think that it's not just what they remember, it's what they want to find again. They want to have that community again. In this photo, you can't really see that there are a couple of men riding around the periphery, and they're riding on green horses that under the construction, the gray construction, every little person that's playing soccer and they're made out of pipe cleaners is in a different position. They took such care. They were so detailed in how they did everything. One of the things that happened because the soccer field was at the back of the camp was as they were playing soccer, they would accidentally kick soccer balls over the fence. So you would find there was a canal running right by the border fence. So you could always find soccer balls. In December, and they didn't know the camp was going to close soon because no one knew the camp was going to close soon, but they started to sign their names onto the soccer balls and purposely kick them over. And that's what I think about, these kids writing their names and purposely kicking them over. So if they could not be free, if they believed that soccer balls then were, to me, a way to make themselves known to the outside. And we were able to exhibit one of those soccer balls. Oh, there you go. There you can see the little spectators and the green horses. This is titled the National Park of Honduras. So I looked up to see if there was a park like this that was the national park, and there's not. There are many national parks, but nothing looks like this. This is a really creative piece because they use bottle tops, they use crepe paper, you can see the popsicle sticks, you can see cotton. There's a little tiny sign at the entry that says take care of the environment. There's a tiny little table in the left corner by the tree, and they used bottle tops to represent the seats. And then you can't see it in the photo, but there's tiny plates of food. Again, very detailed in their art. There's a seesaw, there's a stand where you can buy food. That little building is a bathroom, there's swings, and there's several little kids cut out of construction paper playing there. So David Romo used to call it the uncamp. It was the opposite of the camp. The kids were free and they had all kinds of things to play with. So this is the uncamp. This is a very special piece to me, and you'll see why in a second. So again, it's made out of recycled boxes. It's, you know, paint. There's no inside to this church, it's just the front. But what we did notice is that it had a very sturdy bottom. So I think if you go to the next photo, I think you'll see it right there. So when we turned it over, and fortunately we were with the attorney. When we turned it over, we saw that it said female UAC restroom. So we asked the attorney, what is UAC? And he said, unaccompanied alien child. And as someone who was born in Juarez, and I remember the paperwork that said I was an alien and how I felt so weird as a little kid being called an alien. And I don't know if you all saw that Biden is removing the word alien from government documents, but unaccompanied alien child. So we didn't know, like, did they know that that's what that meant? Did they just like take it because it was so sturdy? I like to believe that it was, although really I don't think so, but I like to believe that it was purposeful on their part to build something beautiful on top of an ugly word, alien. Here's that national hero again. He also appears on their currency. This is the national flower of Guatemala, la monja blanca. And they use cotton and crepe paper for this. So the teachers told us that when the kids were saying they wanted to draw a monja blanca, which means a white nun, the teachers were like, that's weird. I wonder where they're going to draw white nuns, because we don't know it here in the United States, this flower. And then they learned, oh, it's a flower. So there's a couple of these. This piece is probably 4 feet across. Lenguajes in Charlie 1. So Charlie 1 is the tent. So it's the languages in the tent Charlie. Each of those little speech bubbles has a word or a phrase, like good morning, or thank you for your help, or the word work, I remember was there, or the sentence, we are in Tornillo. So you find it in English, you find it in Spanish, and then you find it in one of the Mayan languages, Chuj. So, you know, there were children there, indigenous children speaking different indigenous languages. And one of the things that we heard from the attorney was for the children who were speaking indigenous languages, whose Spanish was a second language and may not have been a very, they would communicate or could communicate, they would separate them in different tents. The beautiful Quetzal. But I just look at these landscapes and I think, you know, green and water and flowers and trees. And then they're here in the desert where it's hot. When I was working with one of the shelters on this side, and it was probably during the month of March one year, and it's still chilly here. I mean, it's not like where you are, it's not snowing and stuff, but it's chilly. But I didn't even need a sweater, and I was serving food outside, and there was a long line of Central American asylum seekers, and they were all freezing. We're used to the warmth, and it wasn't that cold. So I think about these kids thinking back to where they came from and where they are now, or where they were then, I should say. So again, one of the pyramids. Another very well-known spot in Guatemala, the volcano outside of the city of Antigua. So this says Republic of El Salvador in Central America. And here we have the symbol for Honduras. Speaking of Honduras, we had a very special guest the day that we opened the exhibit in April of 2019, and that was a young man from Honduras. We call him Freddie, that's not his real name. He had been at Tornillo in the months right before this art project, and we flew him to El Paso. He was already with his sponsor, and we flew him to El Paso, and when we exhibited it in the museum, we had recreated something like the tents that they were in, and we had also put a fence with barbed wire. So I told him, Freddie, before you walk in, I want you to know that we try to recreate the feeling of Tornillo. So I want you to be prepared. Are you going to be okay seeing the barbed wire? And he said, yeah, I'm going to be fine. And he walked in and he was very quiet. He walked up to the barbed wire and he said, yeah, this is how it felt to be with the barbed wire. And then he looked at each of the art pieces and he says, when I look at these art pieces, I know that behind every beautiful piece of art is a child desperate to be free. And I don't think that I could have said it more eloquently, a way to combine the fact that they created this beauty and they were basically incarcerated. The national flag of Honduras. The white nun flower. Again, a quetzal. So let me tell you about this image. To me, this is an incredible image. This young man did have some art classes back in his, and when the kids saw this painting, they were just in awe, just like I am. And they asked him, would he give them art lessons? And he said, sure, he would, he would be happy. They were very bored kids, very locked up kids. And he said, sure. So he gave them the first lesson. It was supposed to last, I think, 30 minutes, 45 minutes. It lasted 2 hours. The kids loved it so much. Under the Flores Agreement, they're supposed to have classes, but the classes really were them going into one of the big tents and watching videos in English that they didn't understand and getting handouts that they didn't understand. So they were not really getting any kind of education. So they were through. Oh, we can hardly wait for you to teach us every day so we can be wonderful artists like you. And after the first class, he was released to a sponsor. And everybody was so happy for him and so sad for themselves. This one piece was not part of the 4-day art project. It was made for the Day of the Virgen de Guadalupe, December 12th. If you could see this in person, those flowers that surround it, and I don't even know what kind of paper that is, but they're so beautifully made. I've never seen flowers quite like that. This is an example of one of the art pieces that was made by a team. The bigger pieces were made by teams, the paintings were made by individuals, but you can see how the right side is lighter than the left side. So you can just tell the difference between the kids that were actually using the pencils to color. And I really love this because it incorporates Mayan symbols and really looks to me like the embroidery from Guatemala. And it's the Independence Day for Guatemala, the 15th of September, 1821, and the Quetzal, of course. In fact, that is the national symbol of Guatemala, the Quetzal with that scroll. That's the back of one of the art pieces where we can actually figure out the name of the kids. The staff scratched it out. So there's a question in the chat about what was the process for getting sponsors for the kids. I would say that the vast majority of asylum seekers who came from Central America had family here already. So that it was easy for them to have sponsors because they already had family here. So for example, been here for 15 years already. And Freddie really didn't know him. He left when he was a very young kid. So for the most part, they already had family here, and that's who would be the sponsors. In the case of someone who didn't have a sponsor, people could apply to be their sponsors. So you would have, for example, churches step up to be sponsors. I saw some of that. The sponsors had to go through a vetting process. So one is you had to prove that you could actually be financially responsible for the person. And then, of course, you had to promise to get them to their court dates. The asylum seekers had about 5 court dates during the time they were seeking asylum. And whether you got asylum or not, well, let me back up. Before you were allowed to even come to the United States to seek asylum, like when you were right at the border, you would be interviewed to see if you were eligible. There's this thing called a credible fear interview. Do we believe that you're afraid to be back home? So people would bring, not the kids, but grown-ups would bring evidence like newspaper clippings, letters, government documents. So once you got through that, then you would, when they would say, okay, we're going to let you go to court, it depended totally on what city you had your court dates in, whether you would get asylum or not. Here in my hometown of El Paso, 1 out of 10 asylum seekers were allowed to remain. 90% were rejected. In places like Boston, it was reversed. The majority were allowed to remain. The kids and the adults went to these court dates. Like I say, it was usually 5. In 2019, Trump has instituted the very incorrectly named Migrant Protection Protocol, which meant that sorry. So the Migrant Protection Protocol, or the MPP, also known, my granddaughter's trying to get them to stop barking, also known as the Remain in Mexico policy. What that did is when someone came to apply for asylum, they would be put into detention here for maybe a day in what are called the hieleras, the ice boxes. So those would be the cages. And they're called ice boxes because they were kept at such a cold temperature that the asylum seeker said it was like being in an ice box. And the government said that the reason they kept it so cold was to slow down the spread of germs. But it was like freezing. And I don't know if you've ever seen the aluminum blankets that people use when they're camping, or sometimes the marathon runners get covered. That's what the kids and their parents covered themselves with. So they would be there for a couple of days, and under MPP, they would be sent across to whatever city, Mexican border city, the government decided to wait for experiences. It has most affected mothers and children. So the US immigration officers would walk the mothers and children across the bridge, hand them over to Mexican immigration officers, who sometimes, at least in the case of where I live, would tell them where to get help and sometimes not. And suddenly you have, in the case of the city across the border from me, 16,000 asylum seekers who don't know anyone there. They're not Mexican. Usually with no resources, no money. And they become extremely vulnerable to kidnappers, to very violent sexual attacks. So what people started to do, what criminals started to do, was to drive around the bridge where the women and children were released, and they would, stop and say, "Hey, I know a shelter where you can stay. I'll give you a ride." And the mothers are desperate. Like, what are they going to do? They're out on the streets with their kids, and so many said, okay. And then the next thing you know, they're kidnapped. And they kidnap them either to traffic them or for ransom. So they would take everybody except the ones from Guatemala, everybody else had a cell phone. They would take the cell phone and they would just start calling the people on the cell phone until they found the relative. So I've met women who've been kidnapped twice. The Institute of Oral History, where I work, we've been doing oral histories with asylum seekers and also their advocates. COVID has stopped us temporarily because we can't cross the border. But I'm never going to forget one time that I was in an office. I was in the office of the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society in Juarez, and I was with an attorney from an organization here called Las Americas, and they're one of the few attorneys that would cross the border to give legal counsel to the asylum seekers. And so the attorneys have to ask, really, tell me in detail the horrible things you've experienced, because that's what's going to get you across the border. And one woman started to cry almost immediately. And I learned later that she was raped once by a smuggler. She was raped by a Mexican policeman. She had a horrible, horrible story. So the attorney, with a lot of compassion, said, do you want your little girl to sit outside? My paralegal will go with her, so she doesn't have to hear everything. And I'm never going to forget that mom said she was there. We don't have to send her outside. So I just want you to know that what our government has been doing for the past 4 years not only has traumatized children, they had shelters so you had babies being taken from their mothers. It also traumatized families, mothers and fathers, and put them in the most horrific, vulnerable situations you can imagine. And I think now with this new administration, I have a lot of hope, but we also can't just sit back and relax and think it's all going to be okay. There's the caravan coming from Honduras, and they're coming because of everything, the natural disasters, everything that's happened. The government in Guatemala has set the police on them. The Mexican government has been working with the previous administration, also economic pressure from the US. So we still have a lot of work to do. It's not over. It's more hopeful, but it's still a lot of work to do. And I appreciate all of you very much for attending tonight and for listening to what I have to share with you, for looking at the resiliency, the creativity of the kids. In that camp, they were supposed to be 13 to 17, but what Freddie told us was that he saw children under 10 that were there. So, resilient, creative kids with hope. They have hope. It hasn't been killed in them yet. So thank you so much for being here tonight, and thank you to the Charter Oak Cultural Center invitation to be here.
Dr. Leyva, thank you so much for not only being with us tonight, but for your life's work and for the tremendous heart that you bring to such a horrendous situation. You are an inspiration. Tell us, we've done a couple of things in the Greater Hartford area to protest these policies. Do you have, and I don't mean to put you on the spot, and it's not your responsibility to form this for us, but if you do have any ideas about what we could do now that there is hope on the horizon, we'd be very open to hearing it.
One thing that became really clear to me over the past few years is that there are these incredible dedicated attorneys who are so important throughout this whole legal system. And So one thing I always say is to donate to the attorneys that are working with the asylum seekers. And I'll put in the chat a couple of organizations that I really respect a lot.
Oh, that would be wonderful. Thank you. Thank you so much for that. You know, this is kind of an old idea, but I don't know, maybe it has some value. Has anyone thought about turning the art into a fundraiser, like making them into cards or anything like that?
So people have talked to me about it, and because it's officially owned by the university, that puts us in a position where I have to go through the legal department to see if that's even possible.
If that's, you know, because I was thinking maybe we could raise a good sum of money that way. If you need help with that, the Charter Cultural Center would like to help you with that.
Okay, that would be great. That would be great.
We have a couple more minutes. Do you have the energy to entertain some more questions, or it's okay if you don't?
Yeah, I'm putting another organization, but this one is in Juarez. And I'm typing.
Would anyone like, well, Dr. Leyva is typing, would anyone like to ask a question? You could raise your hand. We'll call on you. Or any reactions that you're having that you'd like to share, even if it's not a question. Or a pet you'd like to talk to us? I'm
So
looking.
I will point out that Mary Dunn is here, and she has been a great advocate for those trapped across the border in MPPs. I just want to recognize that she's here because I admire her work very much.
Hi, Yolanda. Thank you. We love
There
you.
you are.
And we're so glad you're here. I was just in the background. I was listening, and your exhibit was so moving, and your work. Oh, I just found out you were doing this and hopped on a bit late. I'm so glad I caught you. Thank you.
It's good to see you,
lovely.
Mary.
It's good to see you too.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And Adeline just asked, and Mary, this speaks to what you were just saying. Yes, we've recorded tonight, and the exhibit will be on Charter Oak's website as just the exhibit, and then you'll also have this recording available to you.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Figure out how to do that. It's not it's not so easy to do that, but we're gonna figure it out. Any other questions? Oh, something else?
They're helping to treat the trauma in parents. That's a really good question about, have there been any organized responses to treat the trauma in children? I know that there have been individual psychologists who are focusing on the children and the trauma. The organization in Juarez that I put in the chat, and I'm sure I said it wrong, Denise has to tell me, because I always spell. Oh, thank you, Denise, for putting all of this. So she put the links, and also just Annunciation House. Thank you. But what I put Raíces and I put Las Américas, but there's an organization in Juarez called Juntas Vamos, Together We Go. And it started out as a organization for women in Juarez with cancer, because even though Juarez is a city of 2 million, there was no cancer treatment available to them. And so for poor women, they had to somehow raise the money. But the woman who started it also began, and this is what I think I spelled wrong. Right, Denise? I'm spelling it wrong. It's a combination of Nicaragua, Honduras, Guatemala, and El Salvador. So I made a big mess of that spelling because I never can get it right. But if you go to the Juntas Vamos website, you will see, or Denise, can you find it and put it up for me, please? So
Yes, I'm looking.
thank you. So Denise will put it up right now. That organization has an alternative to women being on the streets when they're sent there through MPP. And it's a home, it's owned by the Catholic Church, and the women are there with their kids. And to make money, they embroider these very beautiful bags, and you can buy them online, and they're $35. The women get to keep 20 of the dollars, and then the other part goes back to the house and also to buy more materials. But that's an organization that I would really support because it's on the other side of the border. It's connected to the Columban Fathers on this side of the border. And, you know, it's to me a very creative way to help women that have no place to go because of our policies. And like I say, it's very small, and they're trying to open also a healing center to deal with the trauma, but that requires money as well.
Do you think that once COVID is over, we could organize a group of therapists to go down there?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Okay, so
Yeah.
well, I said to Dr. Leyva before we started, just we've had the most lovely communication as we arranged for tonight. And I said, we are not letting you go. You are part of the Charter Oak family now. So, and there's so much to be done, and we want to do it with you.
That would be wonderful.
Yeah,
That
this
would
is
be
just the
wonderful.
beginning. This is just the beginning. And of course, we want to have you back too.
That would be great.
Yeah.
That is one good thing about not being able to travel, that I have been so many places this year.
Yeah. How do you like Hartford?
That's,
You like it?
I really like it. I like
It
the
looks very
snow.
much, it looks very much like your house, right?
Right.
So before
Yeah.
we end, any final thoughts, questions? We have like 1 more minute. Anybody need anything? Well, I want to thank you all. Oh,
How many children do you think will be reunited with the kids, with their parents? Because you said some of the sponsors are family members. You said some of the sponsors are family members.
Right.
And so will these children ever get to be with their parents again?
God, that is such a good question, Beverly. I don't know. Actually, in some cases, the sponsor is one of the parents. So there might be one parent back in Central America and one parent here, so they are reunited with that parent. Or sometimes it's aunts or uncles, sometimes it's grandparents. I've seen grandparents be sponsored. I don't know whether they will ever get to see the other parent again. And then those 600 kids, I don't know what's going to happen to those 600 children that they can't find their parents because they deported them.
Well, that's basically what I meant, because they came with one parent most likely, or they could have some kids came in groups with somebody, a stranger, or it was
Right.
arranged by the parent. And then they were, you know, I don't know if they were supposed to be later reunited with a family member. And would some of these children know who the family they were supposed to be going to? Or plan to go to if the
right.
parents told them, or one parent told them?
So Well, in the case of Freddie, for example, he was raised by his mother because his father had been here for 15 years. His mother was very sick, and so she couldn't make the trip. So he told her, let me go to the United States and join my father, who I don't really know because he's been in the United States, and then I can help support you since you can't work. So here it was Freddie's father, but he didn't know him. I mean, they're just, when he was released to his father as his sponsor, that's when they started to get to know each other. And I think that's true of other family members who are sponsors. If they've been in the United States, maybe they've talked on the phone. That's common to talk on the phone, but not know them face to face.
Okay, and how about these little kids, the babies, that if they were, did they do any markings or anything so they could know who the parents are? Or, you know, when the kids were taken away from the parents?
It's a
Or is
big
that-
mess. It's a
Yeah.
big mess. They did
I
it
know.
without any system in place.
That's what I thought.
And you know, so I've read about the difficulty that children have after they've been separated, returning to the parent, because I guess they feel as little kids, why didn't you protect me? So I've read that, but what I have seen personally is with the children who are in Juarez with their mothers who are not separated, they're still angry at their mothers because, you know, I'm talking about 5-year-olds, 4-year-olds. Why did we have to do this? You know, now we don't even have a place to live and I miss my family back home. And sometimes it breaks my heart because the mothers are doing everything so their children live. They're doing everything so the children have food. They're doing everything so the children are not, you know, taken by the gangs. But they're so little that they don't understand that. And sometimes I just see them angry at their mothers and tremendous guilt on part of the mothers. You know, I met so many, I guess, young men from, especially from Guatemala. And I was like, they're so little. You know, they're short and so even when I was trying to one time get clothes for some of the young men, like I had to buy boys' clothing for them. They were so little. And I thought, well, maybe they're just little. But it turned out that they were all a lifetime of malnourishment. That's why they were so little.
Thank you. Thank you for your work that you've done.
Thank you.
So everyone, now it's time for us to consider what our work is, and Charter Oak will send out some more information, and we'll work with Dr. Leyva. And this is again just the beginning. Thank you so much for coming tonight, for caring, for
Absolutely.
paying attention to this. And in addition to the work we're going to do, let's also send out prayers and blessings to all these children who have been so traumatized and have met with such cruelty, and
Yeah.
by our country, at the hands of our country. So, and Dr. Leyva, blessings to you. We look forward to the next time our paths cross, which we know will be
too.
very soon.
Me
And
too.
I want to remind everybody that on Thursday night, we're going to have that lecture with Chris Viles from University of Connecticut, talking about what Donald Trump has taught us about authoritarianism in the United States. So a kind of an unfortunate compliment to the discussion tonight. Bless you all.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for your kind hearts. And again, Dr. Leyva, it has been an honor to learn at your feet tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night, everybody.
Thank you.
And thank
Good
you
night,
for your help,
Yolanda.
Denise.
And thank
And
you.
hi,
You're welcome.
Susan
Thank you so
Malika.
much.
Thank you, Susan.
Bye.
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 Gracias.